The winter of 1946 fell upon Chicago like a judgment. It was a cold that felt personal, a predatory thing that seeped through the thickest wool coats and settled deep in the bones. For Sergeant Isaac Washington, late of the 92nd Infantry Division, the cold was just another enemy in a war that was supposed to be over. He had fought his way up the boot of Italy through mud and machine gun fire, fueled by the promise of a better world, a world he was helping to build. But the Chicago he returned to was a city of frozen promises. The hero's welcome was for other men, in other neighborhoods. For him, there was only the familiar chill of indifference and the biting wind that swept off Lake Michigan, a wind that made no distinction between a decorated veteran and a stray dog. If you believe in our mission to unearth these forgotten histories, consider supporting us with a super thanks. And if you already stand with Sergeant Washington, leave a "Stay strong, Sergeant Washington" in the comments below. Isaac worked the graveyard shift as a security guard at a massive, half-empty warehouse in the South Loop. The textile company that owned it was slowly moving its operations south, leaving the cavernous building to the rats and the ghosts of industry. His job was simple: walk the perimeter, check the locks, and make sure no one tried to steal the few remaining bolts of fabric or the rusting machinery. It was a lonely, silent job, a purgatory of echoing footsteps and the groan of old iron. But it was a job, and in the winter of '46, a black man with a steady job was a rarity to be cherished, no matter how soul-crushing it might be. He wore his old army greatcoat, the thick wool still smelling faintly of damp earth and distant battles. It was a better coat than any he could afford now, a relic of a time when his life had a clear and undeniable purpose. Now, his purpose was to keep the cold out of a building that was already dead inside. One night, the cold sharpened its teeth. The temperature plunged into the single digits, and the wind howled with a biblical fury. As Isaac made his rounds, huddled deep within his coat, he saw them. At first, they were just a miserable bundle of rags pressed against the brick wall of the warehouse, seeking what little shelter the recessed loading dock door could offer. But as he drew closer, his kerosene lantern casting a flickering, unsteady light, the bundle resolved into 4 human forms, 4 women. He couldn't tell their ages. The cold and the grime were cruel masks. One was old, her face a roadmap of sorrows, her breath a series of shallow white puffs. Another was young, barely a woman at all, clutching a threadbare blanket around her shoulders as if it were a shield. The other 2 were somewhere in between, their faces hollowed out by hunger and exhaustion, their eyes reflecting the lantern light with a dull, defeated sheen. They weren't speaking, they were past that. They were simply enduring, a silent tableau of human misery. Isaac stopped. The company rules were clear. Vagrants were to be reported and driven off the property immediately. No exceptions. He was supposed to be the enforcer of that rule, the uniformed agent of a faceless owner who lived in a warm house in a distant suburb and saw these women not as people, but as a liability. He was supposed to shout at them, to threaten them with the police, to chase them back out into the killing wind. He knew the words he was supposed to say. He had heard them spoken to men who looked just like him his whole life. He looked at the women, and he didn't see vagrants. He saw his mother trying to stretch a soup bone to feed 3 children. He saw his sister, her hands raw from scrubbing other people's floors. He saw the Italian women in the bombed-out villages, their faces etched with the same look of stunned, silent suffering. He saw human beings on the verge of being extinguished by a world that had deemed them worthless. His mind flashed to a night in the Apennine Mountains, a freezing rain turning the whole world to mud. He had shared his last sea ration with a young private from Mississippi who was shaking so badly from the cold he couldn't hold his rifle steady. The boy had cried with gratitude. It was a simple act, a human act. It was what you did when the world was trying to kill you. You huddled together. You shared what little warmth you had. Isaac looked up and down the deserted street. The snow was beginning to fall again, thick, heavy flakes that swirled in the lantern light. He looked at the massive padlocked door of the warehouse. He had the key. Behind that door was a small, unused office just off the main floor. It had 4 walls. and a roof. It wasn't heated, but it was out of the wind. Breaking the rules meant losing his job. Losing his job meant he would be out here with them in a week. It was a terrifying thought. But then he looked at the old woman, her eyes closed, her body so still he thought for a terrifying second that the cold had already claimed her. He saw a faint tremor run through the youngest girl's frame, and in that moment, the fear for his job was eclipsed by a deeper, more profound fear. The fear of what he would become if he walked away. He had not survived a war against one kind of tyranny to become a foot soldier for another. He cleared his throat. The sound was rough, and it made all four women flinch. "Ma'am," he said, his voice softer than he intended. "All of you, you can't stay out here. You'll die." The oldest woman opened her eyes. They were cloudy but sharp. "And where would you have us go, soldier?" she asked, her voice a dry rasp. "The lake's too cold to jump in." Isaac's jaw tightened. He ignored the bitter truth of her words. He made a decision. It wasn't a grand, heroic decision made with a swell of triumphant music. It was a quiet, stubborn, human decision made in the face of an inhuman cold. He reached into his pocket and his fingers closed around the cold, heavy brass key. "You're not going to the lake," he said, his voice low and steady. "You're coming with me, just for the night, to get out of the wind." He turned and slid the key into the massive lock. The sound of the tumblers turning was deafeningly loud in the frozen silence of the street. It was the sound of a rule being broken. It was the sound of a man choosing his own humanity over his own security. It was the sound of a door opening into a world of trouble. The heavy iron door groaned open, complaining loudly as it surrendered to the force of Isaac's push. The air that spilled out from within the warehouse was not warm, but it was still. It was dead air, thick with the scent of dust, machine oil, and something else. The faint, dry smell of decay, of a place that had been forgotten by purpose. Isaac held the lantern high, and the light carved a small, trembling circle out of an ocean of darkness. The women hesitated at the threshold, their eyes wide, peering into the cavernous gloom. To them, it must have looked like the belly of some great metal beast. Towering racks, skeletal and empty, rose up into the darkness, disappearing into a ceiling they could not see. The concrete floor, stained with a generation of grime, stretched away into blackness. "In here," Isaac said, his voice a low command. "Quickly, before someone sees." He ushered them inside one by one, their movements stiff with cold and suspicion. The youngest girl, who looked no more than 17, clung to the arm of one of the middle-aged women, her eyes darting into every shadow. The old woman, however, walked with a slow, deliberate shuffle, her gaze assessing, missing nothing. She had the air of someone who had seen the inside of many strange and unwelcoming places. Isaac pulled the massive door shut, and the sound of it locking echoed through the vast space with a terrifying finality. They were sealed in. For a moment, a wave of panic washed over him. He was a guard who had just locked 4 trespassers inside the very building he was paid to protect. The absurdity of it, the sheer career-ending stupidity of it, was a knot in his stomach. "The office is this way," he said, pushing the thought aside. He led them away from the main loading bay, his footsteps and their shuffling feet the only sounds besides the lonely howl of the wind outside. The office was little more than a cage of frosted glass and warped wood built into a corner of the main floor. The door handle was loose, and the wood was splintered near the lock. Inside, it was cramped, containing only a single metal desk, a broken chair, and a calendar on the wall, still showing the month of July 1945, as if time had stopped here when the war ended. But it was a room. It had 4 walls. The women huddled together in the center of the small space, looking lost. The reality of their situation seemed to settle on them. They were safe from the wind, but they were still homeless, still hungry, still trapped. Isaac set the lantern on the desk, its warm glow pushing the harshest shadows into the corners. "It's not much," he said, his words feeling foolish and inadequate, "but it's out of the elements." The oldest woman, Hattie, looked at him, her eyes seeming to weigh his soul. "It is more than we had, soldier. We thank you." Her voice was formal. dignified, creating a space around her that even her ragged clothes and dire circumstances could not breach. The youngest, Sarah, was trembling, not just from cold now, but from fear. The woman she was clinging to, Martha, a sturdy woman with hands that were chapped and red, put a protective arm around her. "It'll be all right, sweetie. We're safe for now." The fourth woman, June, was quiet. She leaned against the wall, her eyes closed, as if the simple act of standing was draining the last of her reserves. She was thinner than the others, with a cough that she tried to muffle in the collar of her thin coat. Isaac knew he couldn't just leave them there. He left the office and ventured back into the cavernous warehouse. He knew this place, every corner of it. In a far section where they used to store raw materials, there were stacks of old burlap sacks. They were dusty and smelled of raw cotton, but they were thick. He gathered up an armful, as many as he could carry, and brought them back. He laid them out on the floor of the office, creating a rough makeshift pallet. It was a pathetic offering, but it was better than the frozen concrete. The women watched him work, their expressions a mixture of surprise and a caution so deep it had become a part of their bones. People in uniforms did not help them. They moved them along, arrested them, harassed them. This quiet, solitary act of kindness was a disruption of the natural order they had come to expect. He returned to the desk and unscrewed the top of his metal thermos. The steam that rose from it smelled of chicory and burnt coffee, but it was hot. He poured the dark liquid into the cup lid and offered it to Hattie. She looked at the cup, then at his face, and then she took it, her gnarled fingers wrapping around it to soak up the warmth. She took a small, careful sip before passing it to June, who drank more deeply, the hot liquid seeming to revive her slightly. The cup was passed from one to another, each woman taking only a small amount, ensuring there was enough for the next. It was a practiced ritual of scarcity. Then he unwrapped the wax paper from his sandwich. It was 2 thick slices of day-old bread with a smear of lard and a sprinkle of salt. His dinner. He broke it into 4 uneven pieces and held it out. This time they hesitated. Taking shelter was one thing. Taking a man's food was another. "Go on," he urged, his voice gruff to hide his own discomfort. "It's not much, but it's something." Sarah, the young one, looked at Martha, who gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. The girl reached out with a trembling hand and took the smallest piece, whispering a thank you so faint it was barely audible. The others followed suit, their movements slow, their gratitude expressed not in words, but in the careful way they took the bread, as if it were a sacrament. Isaac retreated from the office, giving them what little privacy the glass walls allowed. He needed to walk, to continue his rounds, to maintain the illusion that this was just another night. As he patrolled the dark, echoing aisles of the warehouse, his mind was a battlefield. He thought of Mr. Henderson, the supervisor. Henderson was a short, fussy man with a clipboard and a perpetual scowl. He was a stickler for the rules, a man who saw the world in black and white, profit and loss. He would arrive at 7:30 sharp. The women had to be gone before then without a trace. No burlap sacks on the floor, no lingering scent of coffee, nothing. What if they were still here? What if Henderson came early? He imagined the scene, the sputtering rage on Henderson's face, the call to the police, the women being dragged out into the morning light, their brief respite ending in a public and humiliating eviction, and him. He would be fired on the spot. No severance, no reference. He'd be blacklisted. The thought sent a cold dread through him that had nothing to do with the temperature. He had a room in a boarding house on the south side. It was small, it was grim, but it was his. He had a mother back in Alabama he sent a few dollars to every month. Losing this job wouldn't just be an inconvenience, it would be a catastrophe. It would be the first step on the path that led directly to where those women were now, huddled against a wall in the dead of winter. He found himself looking at his own reflection in the black, grimy glass of a high window. He saw the familiar uniform, the security guard's patch on the shoulder of his greatcoat. He was supposed to be guarding property, guarding bolts of cloth and silent machines. But tonight, he was guarding something else. He was guarding 4 flickering flames of human life against a storm that sought to extinguish them. He had made his choice. He had chosen them over the cloth, over the machines, over the rules written by men in warm offices. Now, all he could do was face the consequences. He completed his rounds with a heightened sense of alertness. Every creak of the old building, every gust of wind that rattled a loose window pane sounded like an approaching footstep. He checked the locks on the doors he had already checked, his hand resting on the cold brass, reassuring himself that they were secure. He was no longer keeping people out, he was keeping his secret in. As the hours crept by, the sky outside began to lose its inky blackness, softening to a deep, bruised purple. The snow had stopped. Dawn was coming. Isaac's anxiety grew with the light. He walked back to the office and peered through the streaked glass. The lantern had burned low, casting a soft, golden light on the four women. They were all asleep. June's cough had subsided, and she was curled on her side. Martha had her arm around Sarah, who was nestled against her like a child, and Hattie, the old woman, was on her back, her face relaxed in sleep. The deep lines of hardship momentarily smoothed away. They looked peaceful. For the first time in God knows how long, they were sleeping in a place where the wind could not reach them. The sight of them, so vulnerable and so utterly dependent on his discretion, solidified his resolve. The fear was still there, a cold stone in his gut, but it was no longer in command. He had done the right thing. It was a simple, stark, and terrifying truth. He had to wake them. He had to send them back out into the cold. The thought was like a punch. He had given them a few hours of shelter, but he couldn't save them. The city, the world, was still waiting for them, just as cold and indifferent as it was the night before. He gently pushed the office door open. The slight creak was enough to stir Hattie. Her eyes opened instantly, clear and alert. She had been a soldier in her own wars for a very long time. She knew when the truce was over. Hattie's eyes, clear and ancient in the dim light, held Isaac's gaze for a long moment. There was no fear in them, only a deep, weary understanding. She had seen this dawn arrive many times before. She swung her legs stiffly off the burlap pallet and rose, her joints protesting with a series of small, dry cracks. She moved to the other women and gently shook them awake, her touch firm but kind. "Time to go, sisters," she whispered, her voice a low rumble. "The world is waking up." Sarah stirred with a soft moan, her face still clouded with sleep. Martha was instantly alert, her hand going to the girl's shoulder in a gesture of reassurance. June's awakening was heralded by a deep, rattling cough that echoed in the small office, a sound that made Isaac's heart clench with a feeling of helpless pity. He looked at his watch. 6:15. Henderson would be here in just over an hour to erase 4 human lives from the memory of this building. "We must hurry," Isaac said, his voice tight with urgency, "and we must be silent." There was no need for further instruction. Led by Hattie, the women moved with a practiced efficiency born of long experience in being invisible. They folded their thin blankets with precise, economical movements. They straightened their ragged clothes, smoothing out the worst of the wrinkles, a small act of dignity in the face of their utter destitution. Isaac began gathering the burlap sacks, his powerful arms making quick work of the task. He noticed Martha stop and pick up a single, long grey hair from one of the sacks before handing it to him. Hattie's hair. It was a detail he would have missed, a tiny piece of evidence that could have cost him everything. He gave her a grateful nod, and she responded with a flicker of a smile, the first he had seen from any of them. They were a team, bound by a shared secret and a common enemy, the coming daylight and the world it represented. He carried the sacks back to their storage place in the far corner of the warehouse, walking quickly but placing his feet carefully to muffle the sound of his boots on the concrete. When he returned, the women were waiting by the office door, huddled together, ready to face the cold again. The brief interlude was over. The warmth, the safety, the illusion of a home. It had all evaporated with the rising sun. Seeing them there, braced to re-enter their own private hell, was harder for Isaac than sending them in had been. He couldn't just open the door and let them vanish. He had to give them something more. "Listen," he said, keeping his voice low. "It's still bitter out there. Don't just wander. Head south on Archer. About 2 miles down, there's a church, St. Jude's. Big stone building with a green door. When the weather gets this bad, the priest, Father Michael, he opens the basement for folks. There's a boiler room down there. It's warm. They'll have coffee, maybe some bread. It's not a shelter, mind you. They'll ask you to leave by mid-morning, but it's a few more hours out of this wind." The women absorbed this information in silence. It was a gift more valuable than food or money. It was a map, a strategy for survival for the next few hours. It was a piece of knowledge that could mean the difference between life and death. Hattie stepped forward, standing so close he could see the fine, intricate web of lines around her eyes. "You are a good man, Sergeant Washington," she said, her voice quiet but resonant. She looked at the military-issue greatcoat he wore. "They taught you how to fight, but they didn't teach you who the real enemy was. You figured that out for yourself." She reached out a hand, not to touch him, but holding it open in a gesture of acknowledgement. "You put your own neck in the noose for us last night. We know it. Don't think for a second we don't." Isaac just nodded, unable to speak. His throat felt thick. He turned and led them back toward the massive loading dock door, the same one they had entered what felt like a lifetime ago. The world outside was no longer black, but a palette of cold, unforgiving grays. A thin layer of fresh snow covered everything, pristine and beautiful, a liar's blanket over the filth and misery of the city. He put the key in the lock, the metallic click sounding like a gunshot in the silent warehouse. He pulled the heavy door open just enough for them to slip through. One by one, they passed him. June, with a muffled, "God bless you." Martha, with that same quick, fleeting smile and a nod. Sarah, the young one, looked up at him with wide, haunted eyes and whispered, "Thank you," before hurrying to catch up with Martha. Hattie was the last to leave. She paused at the threshold and looked back at him. "Stay strong, soldier," she said. Then she turned and was gone, a small, dark figure against the snow-covered street. He watched them for a moment as they walked away, a tight little group, leaning into the wind, their shoulders hunched, already becoming part of the city's bleak morning landscape. He pulled the door shut, threw the bolt, and was alone again in the echoing silence. The next 45 minutes were the longest of Isaac's life. He was a whirlwind of anxious activity. He swept the floor of the office, though it was already filthy, looking for any sign, any misplaced thread or crumb. He wiped down the desk where the thermos cup had sat. He went over the area near the loading dock door, on his hands and knees, brushing away their footprints from the dusty floor with a rag. He was a criminal cleaning a crime scene, and the crime was compassion. He felt a rising tide of paranoia. Was the air different? Did it smell of them, of their poverty, of their sleep? He opened a high window a crack, letting the razor-sharp air rush in, hoping to scrub the atmosphere of their presence. He was standing by the main entrance, trying to compose his features into a mask of bored indifference, when he heard the sound of a key in the front office lock. 7:28. Mr. Henderson was early. Isaac's heart hammered against his ribs. Henderson bustled in, a gust of cold air and self-importance following him. He was a small man who seemed to be in a constant battle with the world, a battle he fought with paperwork and petty regulations. He wore a crisp suit, a starched collar, and a hat that he placed precisely on the coat rack. "Washington!" he barked, not as a greeting but as an assertion of his presence. "Morning, Mr. Henderson," Isaac said, his voice a model of calm deference. Henderson didn't reply. He began his morning ritual, a series of checks and inspections that Isaac knew by heart. He checked the logbook, his finger tracing the lines of Isaac's hourly entries. He peered at the pressure gauges on the dormant boiler. He walked a short circuit of the main floor, his polished shoes clicking sharply on the concrete. Isaac stood at a respectful distance, his hands clasped behind his back, his posture rigid. He felt like a prisoner awaiting a verdict. Henderson stopped near the glass-walled office. He stood still for a moment, his head tilted. He sniffed the air, once, then twice, his nose twitching like a rodent's. Isaac's blood ran cold. "Something's different in here this morning," Henderson said, his eyes narrowing as they scanned the office. "You smell that, sir?" Isaac asked, feigning ignorance. "That smell, stale, like wet wool. You haven't been letting anyone in here, have you, Washington? The rules are perfectly clear about unauthorized personnel." His gaze was sharp, accusatory. He was fishing, testing for a reaction. "No, sir," Isaac said, his voice perfectly even, betraying none of the terror that was screaming through his veins. "No one's been here but me. Maybe a rat got into some old rags. I can set some new traps." Henderson gave a non-committal grunt. He wasn't satisfied. He walked into the small office, his eyes darting everywhere. He ran a gloved finger along the dusty desktop, leaving a clean streak. He stared at the floor, at the wall, at the old calendar. For a full minute, he said nothing, letting the silence stretch, letting the weight of his suspicion hang in the air. Isaac didn't move a muscle. He didn't breathe. Finally, Henderson turned and walked out of the office. He stopped in front of Isaac, standing a little too close. "See that you do," he said, referring to the rat traps. He stared at Isaac for another few seconds, his pale eyes holding a distinct glint of distrust. "I run a tight ship, Washington. I expect my employees to do the same. Any deviation from the company protocols will be dealt with severely. Am I understood?" "Yes, sir," Isaac said. "Perfectly." Henderson gave one last sweeping look around the warehouse floor, then turned and marched into his own larger office, closing the door behind him with a decisive click. Isaac let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. He had survived. The immediate danger had passed. But as he stood there in the vast, cold emptiness of the warehouse, he knew this was not the end. It was the beginning. He had drawn a line in the snow, and Mr. Henderson had noticed. A storm was coming, and he was standing right in its path. The encounter with Henderson left a sour, metallic taste in Isaac's mouth. It wasn't just the fear of being caught. It was the humiliation. It was the forced deference, the practiced mask of servility he had to wear. It was the way Henderson had looked at him, not as a man, but as a piece of equipment that might be malfunctioning. He had stood there, a decorated combat veteran, a man who had faced down artillery barrages and machine gun nests, and allowed himself to be interrogated like a disobedient child over the phantom smell of wet wool. The injustice of it was a hot coal in his gut. He had spent the war fighting for a freedom that back home felt like a cruel joke. Here freedom was the rich man's right to own everything, including your dignity. The rest of his shift passed in a haze of lingering adrenaline and growing resentment. Every time Henderson's office door opened, Isaac's muscles tensed. He felt watched, scrutinized. He knew that from this day forward, he was a man under suspicion. Henderson was the kind of man who collected grievances, who nurtured suspicions until they flowered into accusations. Isaac had not just broken a rule. He had challenged the petty tyranny of Henderson's world, and Henderson would not forget it. When his replacement, a doughy, apathetic man named Charlie, arrived for the day shift, Isaac could barely manage a grunt of greeting. He clocked out, pulled his greatcoat tighter around him, and stepped out into the biting morning air. The city was fully awake now, a roaring, grinding machine of commerce and desperation. Trucks rumbled past, spewing exhaust into the frozen air. People hurried along the sidewalks, their faces grim, their shoulders hunched against the cold and the general misery of a Monday morning. Isaac felt a profound sense of alienation, as if he were a ghost haunting the edges of this bustling world. He thought of the 4 women. He wondered if they had made it to St. Jude's. Was the basement warm? Did they get any coffee? The questions nagged at him, a small, persistent ache of concern. Their fate was now intertwined with his own, a secret thread connecting his guarded life to their unguarded one. Instead of heading straight for the streetcar that would take him home to his boarding house, Isaac found his feet carrying him south on Archer Avenue. He told himself he was just curious, that he needed to stretch his legs, but he knew he was lying. He needed to know. He needed to see the church with the green door, to confirm that the sanctuary he had offered them, however temporary, was real. The 2-mile walk was brutal. The wind was relentless, finding every seam in his clothing. His face grew numb, and his ears ached with a sharp, piercing pain. By the time he saw the church, his hope had begun to freeze. It was a large, imposing structure of grey stone, soot-stained and grim, looking more like a fortress than a house of God. But the double doors at the front were, as he'd said, a deep, welcoming green. He didn't go in. He stood across the street, pretending to look at a display of tires in a shop window, and watched. He saw a few men, their clothes as ragged as the women's, slip down a set of stone steps at the side of the building, disappearing below ground. A few minutes later, 2 more followed. He felt a small, quiet surge of relief. Father Michael was a good man. The sanctuary was real. He stayed for another 10 minutes, a frozen sentinel, hoping for a glimpse of Hattie or Martha or one of the others, but he saw no sign of them. Perhaps they had already been and gone, or perhaps they had never made it. He couldn't know. He had pointed them toward a faint light in the darkness, but he had no way of knowing if they had reached it. With a heavy sigh, he turned and trudged toward the streetcar stop. The brief warmth of his good deed was gone, replaced by the chilling uncertainty of their fate and the looming threat to his own. The days that followed were a quiet torment. Henderson's scrutiny intensified. He would appear at odd hours during Isaac's shift, a silent specter materializing from the shadows of the warehouse to observe him. He checked the locks Isaac had just checked, inspect the perimeter Isaac had just walked. He started leaving little traps. A crate moved an inch from its previous position, a stray piece of paper left on the floor, to see if Isaac would notice and report them in the logbook. Isaac played the game, his senses honed by years of surviving in far more dangerous environments. He noted every change, every deviation, and logged it with meticulous, maddening precision. He would not give Henderson the satisfaction of catching him in a mistake. It became a silent war of wills, a battle fought in the echoing emptiness of the textile warehouse. The cold snap did not break. The city remained in the grip of the merciless winter. Every night, as Isaac began his rounds, the first thing he did was check the recessed loading dock. The space where the women had huddled was always empty. The thought of them, and of the countless others like them, was a constant presence in the back of his mind. Where were they sleeping? Were they still together? Were they even still alive? The city was a machine that chewed up people like them and spit out nothing but frozen bones. About a week after that first night, as Isaac was making his final round before dawn, he saw a flicker of movement near the loading dock. His heart leaped into his throat. He approached cautiously, his hand resting on the heavy flashlight he carried, his knuckles white. It was Sarah, the young one. She was alone, pressed against the brick wall, shivering violently. Her face was even thinner than he remembered, her eyes larger, darker, pools of pure desperation in the pale oval of her face. "Sarah," he said, his voice low, "what is it? Where are the others?" She looked up at him, and a wave of relief so profound it was almost painful washed over her features. "Sergeant," she breathed. "I didn't know where else to go." Her teeth were chattering so badly she could barely form the words. "It's Hattie. She's real bad. We're in an alley a few blocks from here. She collapsed. She won't wake up. Martha sent me to find you. She said you were a good man." Isaac's mind raced. This was it. This was the moment his one act of quiet rebellion would come crashing down on him. Helping them in secret, under the cover of darkness, was one thing. But this was different. Hattie was sick, maybe dying. They needed real help. A doctor, a hospital. But calling for that kind of help would mean questions, police, and it would all lead back to him. The invisible thread that connected him to them was about to become a rope around his neck. If Sarah's courage in this moment has moved you, a super thanks is the most direct way to help us continue to honor souls as resilient as hers. He looked at the girl's terrified, pleading face. He looked at her thin, inadequate coat and the way she hugged herself to stop the shaking. And he knew there was no choice, not for a man like him. You didn't leave a soldier behind on the battlefield, and you didn't leave a dying old woman in an alley. "Show me," he said, his voice calm and steady, a commander taking charge. "We have to be quick. My shift ends in less than an hour." He followed Sarah through a labyrinth of back streets and alleys, a part of the city that was hidden from the main thoroughfares. It was a world of overflowing dumpsters, rats scurrying in the shadows, and the stench of frozen garbage. In a narrow, dead-end alley between a derelict tenement and a boarded-up butcher shop, he found them. Martha and June were crouched over Hattie's still form, trying to shield her from the wind with their own bodies. They had covered her with every scrap of cloth they possessed, their own blankets, even June's coat, but it wasn't enough. Hattie was lying on a flattened cardboard box, her face grey, her breathing shallow and ragged. She was unconscious. Isaac knelt beside her, pulling off his glove and pressing his fingers to her neck. Her skin was icy cold, but he found a pulse. It was faint, thready, but it was there. "She's alive," he said, "but her heart is weak. We have to get her warm now." "We tried," Martha said, her voice cracking with despair. "We tried to move her, but she's just dead weight. We couldn't lift her." Isaac looked at the small, frail body of the old woman. Then he looked at his own broad shoulders, his strong back. He had carried wounded men heavier than her through the mud of Italy. "I can carry her," he said, "but where can we go? A hospital will call the police. They'll arrest you all for vagrancy." "There's a clinic," June said, her voice raspy from a hacking cough. "A free clinic on Halstead. It's run by a colored doctor, a woman. They don't ask too many questions there. But it's more than a mile away. A mile, carrying a grown woman through the pre-dawn streets of Chicago. If they were seen by a police patrol, it would be over for all of them. It was an insane risk, but leaving her here was a death sentence. "All right," Isaac said, making the decision. "Give me her blanket." He gently bundled Hattie in the thin, worn blanket. Then, with a grunt of effort, he scooped her up into his arms. She was terrifyingly light, like a bundle of dry sticks. He stood up, her head resting against his chest. He could feel the faint, fluttery rhythm of her breathing against the thick wool of his coat. "Let's go," he said to the women. "Stay close to me, and if you see anyone get into a doorway, vanish. Understand?" They nodded, their faces grim but determined, and so they set off, a strange, desperate procession through the sleeping city. Isaac Washington, the night watchman, carrying a dying old woman in his arms, flanked by her tattered and loyal platoon. He was no longer just a guard, he was a rescuer, a fugitive, a man marching deeper and deeper into a battle he could not possibly win. The journey to the clinic on Halstead Street was a descent into a special kind of hell. Every block felt like a mile, every gust of wind like a physical blow. Hattie's weight, initially manageable, soon became a crushing burden. Isaac's arms, conditioned by years of hard labor and military training, began to ache with a deep, burning fire. His back screamed in protest, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the gnawing, relentless anxiety. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every distant sound was the potential approach of a police car. The city, which a few hours ago had been merely indifferent, now felt actively hostile, a predator whose territory they were crossing. Martha, June, and Sarah flanked him like a ragged honor guard. They were his eyes and ears. Martha, her sturdy frame surprisingly agile, would dart ahead at each intersection, peering around the corner before waving him on. Sarah, small and quick, kept watch behind them, her head constantly turning. June, despite her own worsening cough, was a silent, steady presence at his side, her hand occasionally reaching out to adjust the thin blanket around Hattie's face, shielding her from the wind. They moved through the back alleys and side streets, a silent, ghostly troop, avoiding the wider, better-lit avenues where they would be most exposed. They passed tenements where the first lights of morning were beginning to appear in windows. Isaac could see the silhouettes of people starting their day, preparing for work, for school, for lives of ordinary struggle. Those people behind the glass were in another world, a world of warmth and walls, a world Isaac had briefly belonged to and was now risking for a woman he barely knew. He could feel Hattie's shallow breaths against his chest, a fragile, fluttering metronome, counting down the seconds they had left. Her life was literally in his hands. The responsibility was immense, heavier than her physical body. Twice, they had to scramble for cover. The first time, it was the low rumble of a delivery truck coming down a narrow street. Martha hissed a warning, and they melted into the deep shadows of a recessed factory doorway, pressing themselves flat against the cold brick. Isaac held his breath, his heart pounding in his ears, as the truck's headlights swept across the mouth of the alley, a brilliant white beam that missed them by inches. The second time was more terrifying. It was the unmistakable sound of a police whistle, sharp and shrill, from a street over. Instantly they were gone, ducking behind a mountain of overflowing trash cans. They huddled there in the stinking darkness, listening to the sound of running footsteps and shouting voices fade into the distance. It was some other drama, some other piece of the city's endless misery, but for a few heart-stopping moments, Isaac was sure they had been seen. As they drew closer to Halstead, the character of the neighborhood began to change. This was the heart of the Black Belt, a world Isaac knew well. The buildings were more crowded, the signs of poverty more pronounced, but there was also a sense of community, of shared existence. Even at this early hour, there was life. A baker, his face and apron white with flour, was unlocking the metal grate of his shop. A man was sweeping the sidewalk in front of a barber shop. These people saw them. They saw a large black man in a security guard's uniform carrying an old sick woman, followed by 3 other women in ragged clothes. They saw them and they looked away. It wasn't indifference. It was a shared understanding. In this neighborhood, you didn't stare at trouble. You didn't ask questions. You gave your neighbors the dignity of their own struggles and prayed that they would do the same for you. This silent, unspoken courtesy was the only protection they had. They found the clinic. It was a modest storefront, squeezed between a pawn shop and a small grocery. The windows were dark, but a single bare bulb burned over a hand-painted sign that read, Marie Foster, MD Community Health Clinic. There were no official hours posted, just a smaller sign that said, if the light is on, the doctor is in. The light was on. Isaac, his arms now trembling with exhaustion, gently lowered Hattie onto the cold stoop. June, in the grip of a violent coughing fit, leaned against the wall for support. Martha rapped on the glass door, a series of urgent but controlled knocks. For a moment, there was no response. Then, a light flickered on in the back, and a figure emerged from the shadows. The door opened, and a woman stood there. She was tall and slender, with intelligent, weary eyes behind a pair of wire-rimmed glasses. She wore a simple white coat over a plain dress. This was Dr. Marie Foster. Her eyes took in the scene in an instant. The exhausted man, the sick old woman on the ground, the 3 desperate companions. There was no surprise on her face, no judgment. She had seen this tableau in countless variations. "Bring her in," she said, her voice calm and authoritative. Quickly. The clinic was small, just a waiting room with a few wooden chairs and a partitioned-off examination area. It smelled of antiseptic and strong coffee. It was clean, meticulously so, but everything was worn, from the linoleum on the floor to the medical charts stacked on the desk. This was a place that ran on dedication, not on money. Isaac and Martha carried Hattie into the back and lifted her onto a narrow examination table. Dr. Foster was already at work, her movements efficient and precise. She took Hattie's pulse, listened to her chest with a stethoscope, and gently peeled back one of her eyelids to look at her pupil. "Severe hypothermia and exhaustion," she murmured, more to herself than to them. "Pulse is dangerously weak. Lungs are congested. How long has she been unconscious?" "Since sometime in the night," Martha answered, her voice trembling. "She just gave out." Dr. Foster nodded. "You too," she said to Martha and Sarah. "There are blankets in that cabinet. I need you to get them and start rubbing her limbs, her hands, her feet, vigorously. We need to get the circulation going. But be gentle with her torso." She looked at June, who was now leaning in the doorway, her face pale, her breathing labored. "And you, young lady, sit down before you fall down. You have a fever." Then she turned to Isaac. "You're the soldier," she said. It wasn't a question. "I need to get some warm fluids in her. Can you hold her head up for me? Keep it steady." For the next hour, Isaac was part of the doctor's small, desperate team. He watched, filled with a profound sense of awe, as Dr. Foster worked to pull Hattie back from the brink. She administered a shot, something to stabilize Hattie's heart. She managed to get a few spoonfuls of a warm, sugary broth between the old woman's lips. She worked with a fierce, focused intensity, her brow furrowed in concentration. This wasn't a job for her, it was a calling. She was a warrior just like him, but her battlefield was this small room, and her enemies were poverty, neglect, and the indifference of the world. Slowly, agonizingly, a flicker of life returned to Hattie. A faint touch of color seeped back into her gray cheeks. Her breathing, while still shallow, became more regular. At one point, her eyelids fluttered, and a low moan escaped her lips. "She's not out of the woods," Dr. Foster said, finally straightening up and wiping her brow with the back of her hand. "Not by a long shot. She needs to be in a hospital, but she's stable for now." She looked at the faces of the other women, filled with a mixture of hope and fear. "I can let her rest here for the day, and all of you. But tonight, you'll have to find somewhere else. I can't operate a shelter. It would bring the authorities down on me, and then I wouldn't be able to help anyone." The unspoken reality hung hung heavy in the air. This was a temporary reprieve, not a solution. The machine of the city was still waiting for them outside. Dr. Foster turned her attention to Isaac. "And you have a job to get to, don't you?" Isaac looked at the clock on the wall. It was nearly 8 o'clock. Henderson would be there. He would have found Isaac's post abandoned. He would have already called the company. It was over. He had saved Hattie, but he had lost everything else. "I did," he said, the words tasting like ash. "I don't think I have it anymore." Dr. Foster looked at him, her gaze penetrating. She saw the uniform, the exhaustion on his face, the quiet despair in his eyes. She saw a man who had made a choice and was now facing the consequences. "You did a good thing here, soldier," she said softly. "A brave thing, but the world doesn't often reward good and brave men who look like you. You should go. There's nothing more you can do here. Don't make your situation any worse than it already is." He knew she was right. He looked at Hattie, breathing peacefully on the table. He looked at Martha, Sarah, and June, huddled together on the wooden chairs, their faces etched with gratitude. He had done what he could. He had carried them this far. He nodded to Dr. Foster, a silent acknowledgement of their shared battle. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out of the clinic, back into the cold, grey morning. He was a man without a job, a man with no prospects, a man walking toward a future that was as bleak and empty as the winter sky above. Walking away from the clinic felt like a surrender. Isaac's steps were heavy, each one a confirmation of his own defeat. The exhaustion from carrying Hattie had settled deep into his bones, but it was a different kind of weariness that now consumed him. The weariness of a man who has fought a battle only to find himself on the losing side of the war. The sun was higher now, casting long, weak shadows across the frozen sidewalks. The city was in full motion, a symphony of roaring engines, clanging streetcars, and the anonymous murmur of 1,000 lives he was no longer a part of. He was adrift. He knew he should go to the warehouse, face Henderson, and accept the inevitable. Maybe, if he apologized, if he begged, if he crafted some desperate lie about a family emergency, he could salvage his job. But the thought of it made him sick. The thought of standing before that small, pompous man and pleading for his forgiveness was more than his pride could bear. He had not begged for his life in the face of German machine guns, and he would not beg for a pittance of a wage from a man like Henderson. The decision solidified in his mind, hard and clear as ice. He was done. He wouldn't go back. He would let his absence be his resignation. He boarded a streetcar heading south, the fare, a single nickel, feeling like an extravagance. He sank onto a wooden bench at the back, a place where black passengers were expected to sit. The other riders were a blur of weary faces, people on their way to jobs that probably paid too little and demanded too much. He stared out the grimy window at the passing landscape of brick and stone, but he didn't see it. He saw Hattie's grey face. He saw Sarah's pleading eyes. He saw the quiet, fierce determination in Dr. Foster's expression. He had stepped out of his own life and into theirs, and now he couldn't seem to find his way back. His boarding house was a grim, 3-story walk-up that smelled of boiled cabbage and damp wool. His room was on the top floor, a space barely large enough for a narrow bed, a small dresser, and a single chair. It was a cell, but it had been his sanctuary, the one place in the world that belonged only to him. Now, as he unlocked the door and stepped inside, it felt different. It felt like a cage whose door was about to be opened, forcing him out into the wild. He owed 2 weeks' rent. Without his job, he had no way to pay it. The landlady, a stern, unforgiving woman named Mrs. Gable, did not tolerate late payments. He had a week, maybe 10 days, before he would be put out on the street. He sat on the edge of his bed, the springs groaning in protest. He was still in his uniform. He looked down at the security guard's patch on his sleeve, a symbol of a life and a security that were no longer his. He slowly, deliberately, began to unbutton the heavy greatcoat, then the jacket beneath. He took them off and folded them carefully, placing them on the chair. It was a ritual of shedding an identity. He was no longer Sergeant Washington of the 92nd Infantry, nor was he Washington, the night watchman. He was just Isaac, a 28-year-old black man in Chicago in the winter of 1946, with no job, no money, and no future. The days that followed were a slow, grinding descent. He rationed his meager savings cravings, eating only one meal a day, usually a bowl of thin oatmeal or a piece of bread. He spent his time walking. He walked for miles, crisscrossing the city, partly to stay warm, partly to fight off the suffocating despair that threatened to consume him in the confines of his small room. He walked past factories with "No Help Wanted" signs in the windows. He stood in lines at employment agencies, waiting for hours in the biting cold, only to be told there was nothing for a man of his color, regardless of his service record. His veteran status, which he had once hoped would be a key to a better life, was met with indifference, or worse, a sneer. He was just another black man looking for a handout. The humiliation was a constant, bitter companion. He was invisible and despised all at once. The quiet dignity he had always carried within him began to fray at the edges. He started to understand the hollow-eyed look he saw on the faces of so many men in his neighborhood. It was the look of a man who has been told he is worthless so many times that he has started to believe it. One afternoon, his aimless wandering took him past the textile warehouse. He stood across the street, hidden in the doorway of a closed shop, and watched. He saw Henderson come out, locking the front door, his movements as fussy and precise as ever. Then he saw his replacement, Charlie, emerge from the side entrance, his shoulders slumped, his face a mask of boredom. The place was still there. The world had not stopped because of his small act of defiance. The gears of the great machine continued to grind, and he was just one more broken cog that had been spit out and forgotten. He felt a surge of rage, so pure and hot it almost choked him. It wasn't just anger at Henderson, it was anger at the whole rotten system, at a world that built monuments to freedom while grinding the faces of its own people into the dirt. That night, he couldn't sleep. The walls of his room felt like they were closing in on him. He was trapped, not just in the room, but in his life. He thought about leaving Chicago, about going somewhere else. But where? The poison of this country was everywhere. He thought about his mother in Alabama. The few dollars he sent her every month were gone now. The thought of her disappointment, of his failure, was the heaviest burden of all. He was lying in the darkness, staring at the cracks in the ceiling, when he heard a soft knock at his door. He froze. No one ever knocked on his door. It was after 10 o'clock. His first thought was Mrs. Gable coming to demand the rent he didn't have. He lay still, hoping she would go away. But the knock came again, gentle but insistent. With a heavy sigh, he swung his legs out of bed and went to the door. "Who is it?" he asked, his voice rough. A woman's voice answered, soft and familiar. "It's Martha, Sergeant, from the other night." Isaac was so stunned he couldn't move for a second. Martha, here? How had she found him? He fumbled with the lock and opened the door a crack. She was standing in the dim, bare-bulb light of the hallway, her face etched with concern. She was holding a small, covered pot that was steaming faintly. "How did you—" he started, bewildered. "Dr. Foster," she said, offering a small, tired smile. "She knows people. She found out where you worked. And when she heard you'd been let go, she asked around the neighborhood until she found someone who knew where you lived. We were so worried. We heard what happened." She held out the pot. "It's not much, just some soup, but it's hot." Isaac opened the door wider and let her in. The room seemed to shrink with her presence. He took the pot from her, the warmth seeping into his cold hands. It smelled of chicken and vegetables. It smelled like life. "Hattie?" he asked, his voice thick. "How is she?" "She's a fighter," Martha said, her smile widening a little. "Dr. Foster kept her for 2 days. She's weak, but she's alive. The doctor found us a place, a spot in the basement of a church on the west side, a different one. It's not permanent, but it's warm, and we're all together." She looked around the small, bare room, at the folded uniform on the chair, at the single blanket on his bed. Her gaze was compassionate but unflinching. She saw his poverty, his pride, his despair. "You saved her life, Sergeant. You saved all of our lives that first night, and you lost your job for it. That ain't right." Isaac just shook his head, unable to speak. The simple kindness of the gesture, this woman who had nothing bringing him food, undid him in a way that all the hardship and humiliation had not. "We ain't got no money to pay you back," Martha continued, her voice low and earnest. "But we ain't gonna forget what you did. Hattie, she told us. She said a debt of honor has to be paid one way or another." She reached into the pocket of her worn coat. "This ain't much. It's all we got." She held out her hand. In her palm was a small object, something wrapped in a scrap of cloth. Isaac looked down and his breath caught in his throat. It was a medal, a purple heart, the bronze darkened with age, the purple and white ribbon frayed at the edges. "It was her husband's," Martha whispered, "from the First War. He died in France. She's kept it all these years. It's the only thing of value she has left in this world. She told me to give it to you. She said you were a soldier who earned it." Isaac stared at the medal resting in Martha's calloused palm. It was more than a piece of metal. It was a symbol of sacrifice, of honor, of a debt paid in blood. It was an offering from one soldier to another, a recognition that passed between them, across generations, across wars. It was a testament to the fact that even in the darkest, coldest corners of the world, there was still such a thing as honor. To accept it felt wrong, like taking the last possession from a queen. But to refuse it would be to dishonor the sacrifice behind the gift. Slowly, he reached out and took the medal. His fingers closed around it, the metal cool against his skin. He felt its weight, the weight of another man's courage, of a widow's love, of Hattie's profound and humbling gratitude. At that moment, standing in his cold, bare room, with no job and no future, holding a borrowed medal and a pot of soup, Isaac Washington felt, for the first time in a long time, that he was not worthless. He was a man of honor, and that, he realized, was something no one, not even Henderson, could ever take from him. Martha left as quietly as she had arrived, leaving behind the pot of soup, the purple heart, and a profound change in the atmosphere of the small room. The oppressive silence that had been Isaac's constant companion was now filled with the echo of her words and the weight of Hattie's gift. He sat at his small table, the soup warming his hands, the medal lying before him. He didn't eat. He simply looked at the medal, its tarnished bronze surface catching the dim light from the single overhead bulb. It was an object that had seen more of the world's cruelty than he had, an artifact from a different war, a different generation's sacrifice. Yet it spoke a language he understood perfectly. It spoke of duty, of loss, and of a brand of courage that had nothing to do with battlefields and everything to do with facing a world designed to break you. For the first time since losing his job, Isaac felt a flicker of something other than despair. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was something harder, more fundamental. It was resolve. Hattie and the others, with nothing to their names, had reached out to him, had shared the little they had honored him. They had reminded him of who he was. He was not just a victim of Henderson's petty tyranny or the city's cold indifference. He was Sergeant Isaac Washington. He was a man who had made a promise to himself in the freezing mud of Italy, that if he survived, he would live a life that mattered, a life of dignity. He had been so focused on what he had lost, his job, his security, his future, that he had forgotten what he still possessed, his strength, his integrity, his honor. The medal was not just a gift, it was a challenge. It was a call to action. He could not accept such an honor and then simply fade away, surrendering to the slow starvation and the eviction notice that was surely coming. He had to fight. Not with his fists, not with a weapon, but with the same quiet, stubborn resilience that Hattie and Martha and Dr. Foster showed every single day. He had to find a way to reclaim his life, not just for himself, but for them. To fail now would be to betray their faith in him. He ate the soup. It was thin but rich with flavor, and with every spoonful he felt his strength returning. It was more than sustenance. It was a communion. He was no longer alone in his struggle. He was part of a small, invisible army of the dispossessed, bound together by shared hardship and quiet acts of grace. The next morning, Isaac woke up before dawn. He did not put on the security guard uniform. He put on his old army trousers, a clean pressed shirt, and his service shoes polished to a dull shine. He pinned the Purple Heart to the inside pocket of his jacket where it rested against his chest, a secret shield. He looked at his reflection in the cracked mirror of the dresser. He saw a different man from the one who had stumbled home in defeat from the clinic. His eyes were still tired, but the hollowness was gone. In its place was a glint of determination. He had a new plan, born from the desperation of the night. It was a long shot, a fool's errand, but it was better than surrendering. He was going to go over Henderson's head. He was going to find the man who owned the warehouse, the man at the very top of the food chain, and he was going to tell him the truth. He didn't know who the man was or where to find him, but he knew the name of the company, Sterling Textile Corporation. And in a city like Chicago, a name was a place to start. He spent the morning at the public library, a place he hadn't set foot in since he was a boy. He felt out of place among the quiet scholars and whispering librarians, his large calloused hands looking clumsy as he handled the delicate pages of the city business directories. He methodically searched for Sterling Textile, and he found it. The owner and president was a man named Arthur Sterling. The corporate address was not in the industrial South Loop, but on Wacker Drive, in a sleek, modern skyscraper that scraped the winter sky, a world away from the grime and decay of the warehouse. The thought of walking into such a building, of trying to get past the receptionists and secretaries to see a man like Arthur Sterling, was intimidating. They would take one look at him, a black man in army trousers, and have him thrown out. He needed a different approach. He spent the rest of the day in the library's archives, scrolling through microfilms of old newspapers. He searched for Arthur Sterling's name, looking for any information he could find, articles about his business, his charities, his family. After hours of painstaking research, he found what he was looking for, a small society page notice from the previous year announcing Mr. Sterling's donation to a veterans fund. The article mentioned that he was a veteran himself, having served as a captain in the Great War. This was the key. This was the chink in the armor. Sterling was a soldier. He might understand the language of duty and honor in a way that Henderson never could. He just might, be willing to listen to another soldier. That evening, Isaac did not go to Wacker Drive. He went to a different address, one he had found in a society blue book, Arthur Sterling's home. It was in Kenwood, a neighborhood of stately mansions and manicured lawns, a place of impossible wealth and privilege. The houses were set far back from the street, fortress-like, surrounded by wrought iron fences and ancient oak trees. It was a neighborhood designed to keep people like Isaac out. He found the Sterling mansion. It was a massive stone edifice with warm lights glowing in every window. It looked like something from a storybook. A fine thread of smoke curled from one of its many chimneys. Inside that house, a man was living a life of warmth and comfort, utterly oblivious to the consequences of the rules he had set for his business. Rules that were enforced by men like Henderson and that threatened to destroy men like Isaac. Isaac didn't approach the house. He knew that would be a fatal mistake. He would be arrested for trespassing before he could say a single word. Instead, he waited. He stood across the street in the deep shadow of a large elm tree and watched. He was a sentry again, just as he had been at the warehouse, but this time his purpose was different. He was not protecting property. He was hunting for an opportunity. The cold was brutal, but he was used to it. He stood perfectly still, a dark, patient statue, and waited for the world of Arthur Sterling to present him with an opening. Hours passed. Cars, expensive and gleaming, came and went from the long, curved driveway. He saw figures moving behind the sheer curtains of the windows. He was about to give up, to concede that this too was a fool's errand, when the front door opened. A man in a chauffeur's uniform came out, followed by a younger man in a fine wool overcoat. The younger man was talking on his way to a sleek, black automobile parked in the drive. Isaac recognized him from a photograph in the newspaper archives. It was Arthur Sterling's son, Thomas. As Thomas reached the car, he fumbled in his pocket for his keys, and a small, leather-bound notebook fell from his coat, landing unnoticed in the snow beside the driveway. He got into the car without realizing his loss, and the chauffeur drove him away. Isaac's heart began to pound. This was it, the opening, the small, unpredictable accident that could change everything. He waited until the car's taillights disappeared down the street. He looked up and down the block. It was deserted. Taking a deep breath, he walked quickly but not running across the street. He pushed open the heavy iron gate, which was unlocked, and walked up the driveway. His heart was a drum against his ribs. Every window in the house felt like an eye watching him. He reached the spot where the notebook had fallen, bent down, and plucked it from the snow. It was cold and slightly damp. Without hesitating, he turned and walked back down the drive, out the gate and down the street, melting back into the shadows. He did not look back. He didn't open the notebook until he was several blocks away, standing under the dim light of a street lamp. His hands were trembling as he opened the cover. It was an appointment book. The pages were filled with notes and schedules, written in a neat, precise hand. But tucked into a leather flap on the inside cover was what he was looking for, a business card. Engraved in elegant script were the words, Thomas Sterling, Vice President, Sterling Textile Corporation, followed by a phone number and the address on Wacker Drive. But there was something else. On the back of the card, a different number was written in pencil with the word home next to it. It was a private number, a direct line, a way to bypass the gatekeepers. Isaac stood there in the freezing cold, a triumphant, terrifying feeling rising in his chest. He had a name, he had a number, he had a weapon. He didn't know if it would work. He didn't know if he was walking into a greater danger than he had ever faced. But for the first time in a long time, he was no longer just reacting to the world. He was acting upon it. He was a soldier on a mission deep in enemy territory, armed with nothing but a rich man's lost notebook and a poor woman's medal. The next morning, Isaac stood in a phone booth on a busy corner, the city's noise a dull roar outside the glass. The Thomas Sterling business card was propped against the metal coin box, its elegant script a stark contrast to the grimy, graffiti-scarred interior of the booth. He'd spent a sleepless night rehearsing what he would say, turning phrases over in his mind until they were smooth and hard as stones. He knew he would have one chance, a few seconds, to capture the man's attention before he was dismissed. He felt the weight of the Purple Heart in his pocket, a cold, solid reassurance. He dropped a nickel into the slot, the metallic clink echoing the pounding of his own heart. He dialed the private home number, his finger unsteady as he rotated the dial. It rang twice, a crisp, clean sound, so different from the jangling ring of the payphone. A man's voice, young and sharp with impatience, answered. "Yes, Mr. Thomas Sterling?" Isaac asked, his own voice sounding foreign and rough to his ears. He forced it into a lower, calmer register. "Who is this?" the voice demanded, already suspicious. "My name is Isaac Washington, sir," Isaac said, speaking clearly and deliberately. "I believe I have something that belongs to you, a small, leather-bound notebook. You dropped it last night." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. Isaac could almost hear the gears turning in Thomas Sterling's mind, surprise, confusion, and then the dawning of realization. "My appointment book. Where did you find it?" "Outside your father's home in Kenwood," Isaac said, providing the detail to establish his credibility. The tone on the other end of the line shifted instantly. The impatience was replaced by a guarded, transactional curiosity. "I see. Well, I'm very grateful. It's quite important. I can send a driver to retrieve it. Where are you?" This was the critical moment. If he handed it over, the conversation was over. He would be given a small reward, a condescending pat on the head, and sent on his way. His one piece of leverage would be gone. "Sir," Isaac said, his voice firm but respectful, "there's another matter I was hoping to discuss with you and your father. It concerns the Sterling Textile Warehouse. I believe it's a matter of some importance to the integrity of your company. I'd be happy to return your notebook in person at your convenience." Another pause, longer this time. Isaac could sense the man's irritation, the annoyance of having his routine disrupted by a stranger, and a black stranger at that. "What kind of matter? Are you an employee?" "I was," Isaac said, choosing his words carefully. "I was a night watchman. My employment was terminated. I believe the circumstances of my dismissal are something your father, as a veteran, would want to hear about directly. He was gambling, playing the one card he had, the one piece of information he'd gleaned from the library. He heard a muffled sound, as if Thomas Sterling was covering the receiver and speaking to someone else. When he came back on the line, his voice was clipped, decisive. "My father is a very busy man, but I can see you for a few minutes. Wacker Drive, 40th floor. Be here at 11 o'clock and bring the notebook. The line went dead. Isaac hung up the phone, his hand trembling slightly. He had done it. He had gotten through the gate. He had an appointment. Now he had to walk into the lion's den. The Sterling Tower on Wacker Drive was a monument to a different version of America than the one Isaac lived in. The lobby was a cavern of polished marble and gleaming brass. Men in expensive suits and women in elegant dresses moved with an air of effortless purpose. A uniformed guard, a white man with a stern, impassive face, stood near the bank of elevators. Isaac, in his old army trousers and threadbare jacket, felt every eye on him. He was an anomaly, a disruption in the seamless flow of wealth and power. He approached the reception desk, a massive slab of mahogany that looked like an altar. The woman behind it looked up from her typewriter, her expression a carefully neutral mask that did not quite conceal her disdain. "Can I help you? I have an 11 o'clock appointment with Mr. Thomas Sterling," Isaac said, his voice steady. "My name is Isaac Washington." The woman's eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch. She scanned her appointment book, her perfectly manicured finger running down the page. She found his name, and her expression flickered with surprise. "Of course, Mr. Washington," she said, her tone shifting to one of professional, if frosty, courtesy. "Elevator C to the 40th floor." The elevator ride was silent and swift, a smooth, effortless ascent that felt like leaving the real world behind. When the doors opened, he stepped out into a different atmosphere. The air was warm and smelled faintly of leather and lemon polish. The carpet was so thick it muffled his footsteps. He was in a large, quiet reception area where another secretary sat behind another massive desk. She motioned him toward a set of tall, dark wood doors. "Mr. Sterling will see you now." He pushed the doors open and stepped inside. The office was vast, larger than the entire ground floor of his boarding house. One entire wall was a sheet of glass, offering a breathtaking, godlike view of the city and the frozen lake beyond. In the center of the room was a desk the size of a small boat. Behind it sat a man in his late 20s, with slicked back hair and a perfectly tailored suit. Thomas Sterling. He was looking at Isaac with an expression of impatient curiosity, like a scientist examining an unusual insect. But he was not the only one in the room. Seated in a large leather armchair to the side of the desk was an older man. He was tall and lean, with a full head of silver hair and a face that was lined but still handsome. He wore a grey suit of impeccable cut. His eyes, a piercing blue, were fixed on Isaac with an intensity that was far more unnerving than his son's casual arrogance. This was Arthur Sterling. "Mr. Washington," Thomas said, his voice cool. "Thank you for coming. My notebook, I presume." Isaac walked across the expanse of carpet to the desk. He placed the leather notebook on the polished surface. "As promised, sir." Thomas picked it up, flipped through it quickly, and then placed it to one side. The transaction was complete. Now Isaac was on borrowed time. "You said you had something to tell us," Thomas prompted, a hint of condescension in his voice. "Something about the integrity of our company." Isaac did not look at the son. He turned his body slightly and addressed the father directly. "Mr. Sterling," he began, his voice quiet but carrying in the silent room. "My name is Isaac Washington. I was a sergeant in the 92nd Infantry Division. We fought our way up through Italy. I understand you also served, sir." "In the First War." Arthur Sterling's expression did not change, but his blue eyes narrowed slightly. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. "I was a captain in the Argonne." "Then you know, sir," Isaac continued, "that a soldier has a duty, not just to the orders he's given, but to the men beside him. And sometimes he has a duty to do what's right, even if it breaks the rules." Thomas shifted in his chair, impatient. "Get to the point, Washington." Arthur Sterling held up a hand, silencing his son without a word. He continued to look at Isaac. "Go on, Sergeant." And so, Isaac told them. He didn't tell them everything. He didn't mention Hattie's name or the clinic or Dr. Foster. He kept the story simple, focused on the essential facts. He spoke of the brutal cold, of the 4 homeless women huddled against the warehouse wall, of the certainty that they would have frozen to death if left outside. He described the small, unused office, the lack of any heat, the simple act of letting them in to shelter from the wind for a few hours. He spoke of his supervisor, Mr. Henderson, and his obsession with the rules. He described the interrogation over the smell of wet wool. He did not raise his voice. He did not plead or make excuses. He simply reported the events calmly and factually, like a soldier giving an after-action report to a superior officer. "I broke the company rules, sir," Isaac concluded, his gaze steady on Arthur Sterling's face. "I know that, and I was willing to accept the consequences. But the rule in that situation was wrong. It was an order to stand by and watch 4 people die to protect a few bolts of cloth. I served this country because I believed it was a place where property was not more important than human life. I believe the owner of this company, a fellow soldier, would agree." Sutit. For a long time after he finished speaking, the room was silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the city 40 floors below. Thomas Sterling was looking at his father, a slight, scornful smile on his lips, as if to say, "Can you believe this nonsense?" Arthur Sterling, however, was still looking at Isaac. His face was unreadable, a mask of stone. Finally he spoke, his voice a low, gravelly baritone. "You were fired for this?" "I was not fired, sir," Isaac said. "I abandoned my post to take one of the women who had fallen gravely ill to a clinic. I knew I would be fired when I returned, so I did not return." Arthur Sterling nodded slowly. He picked up a pen from his desk and tapped it once, a sharp, decisive sound, on the polished wood. He looked at his son. "Thomas, get Mr. Henderson on the telephone." Thomas looked surprised, then annoyed. "Father, surely you're not taking this seriously." The man admitted he broke the rules. He abandoned his post. "Henderson was right to get him on the telephone," Arthur Sterling repeated, his voice dropping an octave, taking on a tone of command that tolerated no argument. Thomas, his face flushing slightly, picked up the phone and curtly asked the secretary to connect him. A moment later, Thomas held out the receiver to his father. "Henderson." Arthur Sterling took the phone. "Mr. Henderson, this is Arthur Sterling." There was a pause, and Isaac could imagine Henderson on the other end, sputtering with surprise. "I have a man in my office named Isaac Washington. He was a night watchman at the South Loop warehouse. I'd like to hear your account of his employment." Arthur listened for a full minute, his expression unchanging, as Henderson's tinny, agitated voice squawked from the earpiece. Isaac could guess what he was saying, that Washington was insubordinate, unreliable, possibly a thief, that he had smelled vagrants, that Washington had abandoned his post. When Henderson finally finished, Arthur Sterling spoke again, his voice as cold and hard as the winter outside. "Henderson, you are a man who cannot tell the difference between a liability and a human being. You are a man who would rather let people freeze to death than risk a demerit on his record. You lack judgment. You lack compassion. And as of this moment, you lack a job. Consider your employment with Sterling Textile terminated. My son will see to the details." He placed the receiver back in its cradle with a soft, final click. Thomas was staring at his father, his mouth slightly agape, in stunned disbelief. Arthur Sterling ignored him and turned his full attention back to Isaac. "Sergeant Washington," he said, his tone formal, "you were right. The rule was wrong, and the man enforcing it was a fool. You showed initiative, courage, and a sense of duty that goes beyond a company manual. That is a quality I value." He paused. "The position of supervisor at the South Loop warehouse is now vacant. It's yours, if you want it." The offer hung in the silent, opulent office like a flash of lightning, illuminating everything in a stark, unbelievable light. Supervisor, the position that had belonged to Henderson, the petty tyrant who had been the architect of his misery. Isaac was so stunned that for a moment he thought he had misheard. He looked from Arthur Sterling's unreadable face to Thomas's expression of undisguised shock and resentment. This was real. This was happening. His gamble, his desperate one-in-a-million shot in the dark, had not just hit the target, it had obliterated it. A torrent of emotions washed over him, relief so profound it felt like a physical weakness in his knees, vindication that was sharp and sweet as a draught of cool water after a long march, and a dawning, terrifying sense of the responsibility that had just been placed on his shoulders. He, Isaac Washington, who just this morning had been facing eviction and starvation, was now being offered a position of authority, a steady salary, a future. He found his voice and was surprised at how calm it sounded. "Sir, I don't know what to say. I accept. Thank you. Good, Arthur Sterling said with a curt nod, as if the matter was now settled and required no further discussion. He stood up, a signal that the audience was over. He was a tall man, and his bearing still held the unmistakable authority of a military officer. Thomas will handle the paperwork. Your pay will be retroactive to the day you left, and there will be a bonus. Consider it reparations for the incompetence of your former superior. He extended a hand across the massive desk. Welcome back to the company, Mr. Washington. Isaac stepped forward and shook the offered hand. Arthur Sterling's grip was firm, dry, and strong. For a brief moment their eyes met, and in that gaze, Isaac saw a flicker of something he hadn't expected, a deep, abiding sadness. It was the look of a man who had seen too much of the world's ugliness, a man who understood the cost of war and the fragility of honor. It was a look of mutual recognition, a silent acknowledgement that passed between two soldiers who had fought in different trenches but had come away with the same scars on their souls. Then the moment was gone. Arthur Sterling turned and walked toward a private door at the side of the office without a backward glance, leaving Isaac alone with his stunned and resentful new subordinate, Thomas Sterling. The younger Sterling's face was a mask of barely controlled fury. The professional smile he plastered on was thin and brittle. "Well, Washington," he said, the name dripping with sarcasm, "it seems you've made quite an impression on my father. He has a soft spot for old soldiers and their sob stories." He gestured vaguely toward the door. "My secretary will have the necessary forms for you to sign. You can start tomorrow, 7 a.m. Don't be late." Isaac simply nodded, refusing to be drawn into the young man's petty display of pique. He knew he had not won an ally in Thomas Sterling. He had made a powerful enemy, one who would be watching, waiting for him to fail. But that was a battle for another day. Today, he had won the war. He turned and walked out of the office, his back straight, his head held high. He felt the weight of Thomas's glare on him until the heavy wooden doors swung shut behind him. Walking out of the Sterling Tower and back onto the streets of Chicago was like returning to Earth from another planet. The city was the same, the noise, the cold, the crowds, but he was different. He was no longer a ghost haunting its edges. He was a man with a place, a purpose. He walked for several blocks in a daze, the reality of what had happened slowly sinking in. He had faced down power, not with a weapon, but with the truth, and the truth had won. It was a revelation, a small, fragile proof that the world was not entirely corrupt, that honor could on rare occasions still count for something. His first thought was not of himself, not of the warm room and the full meals that his new salary would provide. His first thought was of Hattie and the others. This victory was not just his, it was theirs. The purple heart in his pocket felt warm against his chest. It had been his talisman, his shield. He had a debt of honor to repay. He knew where to go. He made his way to the west side, to the church Martha had mentioned. It was a small, humble brick building, its steeple dwarfed by the surrounding tenements. He found a side door that led to a basement, and as he descended the worn wooden steps, the air grew warmer, filled with the smell of coffee and soup. The basement was a large, low-ceilinged room, dimly lit by a few bare bulbs. Cots were lined up against the walls, and small groups of people were huddled together, talking in low voices or simply sitting in silence, savoring the warmth. It was a haven, a temporary sanctuary from the brutal city. He saw them in a far corner. Hattie, propped up on a cot with a stack of pillows, looking frail but alert. Martha, sitting beside her, mending a tear in a piece of clothing. Sarah and June playing a quiet game of cards on an overturned crate. Martha saw him first. A look of alarm crossed her face, which quickly softened into a welcoming smile as he approached. "Sergeant," she said, her voice warm, "it is good to see you." Hattie's eyes lit up when she saw him. "Soldier," she said, her voice still weak but clear, "you look like a man who has just come from a battle." Isaac pulled the crate closer and sat down, feeling as if he had come home. "I have, Hattie," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "And I think we won." He told them the story. He told them about finding the notebook, about the phone call, about walking into the skyscraper and facing the Sterlings. He described Arthur Sterling, the old soldier, and the moment he had fired Henderson over the phone. As he spoke, a small crowd of the other basement residents gathered around, listening in rapt silence. His story was their story. It was a story of a small, seemingly powerless man standing up to the vast, impersonal forces that ruled their lives. It was a story of unexpected justice, a fairy tale for a world that had forgotten how to believe in them. When he finished, there was a moment of stunned silence, and then someone in the back began to clap. The applause spread, a soft, hopeful sound in the warm basement air. It wasn't loud or boisterous. It was respectful, grateful. It was the sound of people who had been given a reason to believe, if only for a moment, that their struggles were not in vain. Hattie reached out a thin, trembling hand and placed it on his arm. Her eyes were shining with unshed tears. "I knew it," she whispered. "I knew you were a man of honor, my Robert. He would have been proud to call you a brother in arms." Isaac reached into his pocket and took out the purple heart. He gently took Hattie's hand and placed the medal in her palm, closing her fingers around it. "This belongs to you, Hattie," he said softly. "It gave me the courage I needed, but it's your husband's. It's yours. It's time it came home." Hattie looked at the medal, then back at him, her expression a mixture of gratitude and stubborn pride. "A gift is a gift, soldier, and a debt of honor is a debt of honor," he countered gently. "You gave me the courage to fight. Now let me use my victory to help you. I'm a supervisor now. I have a steady wage. You and Martha, Sarah, June, you're not sleeping in basements anymore. I'm going to find you a place, a real place, warm and safe. That's an order." Tears finally spilled from Hattie's eyes and traced paths down her wrinkled cheeks. Martha put an arm around her, her own eyes glistening. Sarah and June looked at him with expressions of pure, unadulterated awe. In their eyes, he wasn't just a security guard or a supervisor, he was a hero. He was their savior. The next day, Isaac Washington walked into the South Loop warehouse not as a guard, but as the boss. He wore a new set of clean, pressed work clothes, not a suit. He didn't want to be Henderson. He wanted to be himself. The day shift workers, who had known him only as the quiet night man, looked at him with a mixture of suspicion and surprise. The news of Henderson's abrupt firing had spread like wildfire. Isaac called a meeting of the small staff. He stood before them, a large, quiet man who radiated a calm authority that Henderson, for all his blustering, had never possessed. "My name is Isaac Washington," he said simply. "I'm your new supervisor. Things are going to be a little different around here. The work will be the same. The standards will be high, but we're going to treat each other with respect. This is a place of work, but we are human beings first. The rules are important, but our humanity is more important. If you see someone in trouble, you help them. That's the first rule now. That's the sterling rule." He looked at the faces before him and saw a flicker of understanding, of hope. He knew he would have to earn their trust, but it was a start. As he walked through the cavernous building, his footsteps echoing in the familiar space, he passed the recessed loading dock. He stopped and looked at the spot where he had first seen the four women, a miserable bundle of rags against the cold brick. It was just an empty space now, but for him it would always be a sacred place. It was the place where he had been tested, the place where he had made a choice that had cost him everything and given him back so much more. It was the place where his real life had begun. He had a long road ahead of him, and he knew Thomas Sterling would be a shadow over his shoulder. But for the first time since coming home from the war, Isaac felt free. Your generous support through Super Thanks ensures that the fire of these powerful memories will never be extinguished. Thank you.